Wolves attacked this pregnant mother bear. What this human baby did put everyone in shock. Let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to our channel. The forest grew silent as dusk settled between the ancient pines. Maple leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, hiding the heavy footsteps of Sierra, a pregnant mother bear, as she trudged through the underbrush. Her belly hung low, swollen with cubs that would arrive any day now. Sierra's breath came in labored pants, her normally powerful body weakened by months of pregnancy and the unexpected early spring thaw that had disrupted her hibernation. She needed to find shelter soon. A twig snapped somewhere to her left. Sierra froze, her sensitive nose picking up a scent that sent fear coursing through her veins. Wolves, not just one, but many. The smell of a hunting pack. Sierra pushed forward with renewed urgency, knowing she couldn't outrun them in her condition. The sharp scent grew stronger as shadows darted between trees at the edge of her vision. The wolf pack had found her. Sierra lumbered toward a cluster of boulders, hoping to protect her back, but she was too slow. A large gray wolf emerged from the trees, its amber eyes fixed on her vulnerable form. 3 more wolves appeared, then another 2, surrounding her in a tightening circle. The lead wolf bared its teeth, a deep growl rumbling in its throat. Sierra rose to her hind legs, making herself appear larger, but the wolves weren't intimidated. They sensed her weakness. The first wolf lunged, teeth snapping at Sierra's hind leg. She swung her massive paw, barely catching the attacker across the muzzle. Another wolf darted in from behind, tearing at her flank. Sierra roared in pain and fury, spinning to defend herself. But her pregnant body betrayed her, movements too slow, too clumsy. The wolves attacked in coordinated bursts, retreating before she could retaliate, then darting back in to tear at her flesh. Blood matted her brown fur as Sierra fought for her life and the lives of her unborn cubs. Then, cutting through the growls and Sierra's desperate roars, came a sound so unexpected that even the wolves paused. A high-pitched wail, fragile and unmistakably human. Sierra's ears swiveled toward the sound. The wolves hesitated, momentarily distracted. The cry came again, louder this time, from a hollow log just beyond the circle of boulders. The lead wolf's attention shifted, head turning toward this new, easier prey. Sierra saw her chance and charged the distracted wolf, sending it tumbling with a powerful blow. The other wolves scattered momentarily, giving Sierra precious seconds to lumber toward the source of the crying. She reached the hollow log and peered inside, her massive head blocking out the fading light. Inside, wrapped in a tattered blue blanket, lay a human baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old, face red from crying, tiny fists waving in distress. Sierra sniffed cautiously. The scent was unfamiliar, not prey, not predator, just small, vulnerable, like the cubs she carried inside her. The wolves regrouped, their growls growing bolder as they closed in once more. Sierra made a decision that defied every instinct of self-preservation. Instead of fleeing, she positioned herself in front of the log, becoming a living shield between the wolves and the human infant. The baby's cries quieted as Sierra's large body blocked the cold wind, providing unexpected warmth and shelter. The lead wolf attacked again, teeth finding purchase in Sierra's already wounded shoulder. She roared in agony but didn't retreat. Another wolf lunged for her exposed belly, the most vulnerable part of her pregnant form. Sierra dropped to all fours, protecting her unborn cubs, and, inadvertently, keeping the log and its precious occupant sheltered behind her massive body. Blood dripped from multiple wounds as Sierra fought with the desperate strength of a mother protecting not just her own offspring, but a strange, helpless creature that awakened something profound in her battered heart. Just as Sierra's strength began to fail, when her legs trembled and her vision blurred from blood loss, a sound cracked through the forest like lightning splitting a tree. The sharp report of a rifle echoed among the pines, followed quickly by a second shot fired into the air. The wolves scattered, disappearing into the gathering darkness as swiftly as they had appeared. Sierra collapsed, her massive body heaving with exhaustion. The baby's cries resumed, softer now, almost questioning. Despite her injuries, despite every natural instinct that should have driven her away from human scent, Sierra dragged herself closer to the log. She gently nudged the opening with her nose, feeling the baby's warmth, hearing its frightened whimpers. And in that moment something impossible happened. The baby stopped crying. A tiny hand reached out, touching Sierra's sensitive nose with feather-light fingers. The forest fell into an eerie silence. Sierra's labored breathing and the infant's occasional coos were the only sounds breaking through the twilight. Blood continued to seep from Sierra's wounds, matting her thick fur. Each breath sent waves of pain through her battered body. She should move, find shelter, tend to her wounds. Her survival instincts screamed these commands. Yet she remained by the log, her large brown eyes fixed on the small human bundle. "Hello there," a deep voice called from the trees. Sierra's head jerked up, muscles tensing despite her exhaustion. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, rifle in hand but pointed downward. "Easy, girl, easy." The man moved slowly, deliberately, his experienced eyes taking in Sierra's wounds and protective stance. This wasn't his first encounter with a bear, but it was certainly the strangest. He kept his distance, watching as Sierra positioned herself more firmly between him and the hollow log. Ethan Blackwood had been tracking the wolf pack for days. As the local forest ranger, it was his job to monitor predator movements, especially when they ventured too close to hiking trails or the small town that bordered the national forest. The gunshots had been meant to scatter the wolves, not to harm them, a standard deterrent. What he hadn't expected was to find a severely wounded pregnant bear, and whatever she was so desperately protecting. Sierra growled, a weak rumble that betrayed her failing strength. Her vision blurred, but she held her ground. The human made no move to approach, instead sinking slowly to a crouch 15 feet away. Minutes stretched between them, a silent assessment. Sierra's protective instincts warred with her growing weakness. The man seemed to sense her dilemma. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said softly, knowing the bear couldn't understand his words but might respond to his tone. He carefully set his rifle on the ground and pushed it away, a gesture that went against every safety protocol he'd been taught. But something in this situation demanded an extraordinary response. "What are you guarding, girl?" As if in answer, the baby let out another cry, this one stronger and more insistent. Ethan's eyes widened, his body tensing with shock. "What in God's name?" He took an involuntary step forward, then froze as Sierra gathered her remaining strength and rose to her full height, swaying dangerously but determined. "A baby? There's a human baby in there?" Ethan's mind raced. The search and rescue team had been looking for 3 days, ever since Lily Morgan reported her 4-month-old son missing from their campsite. The official theory was animal predation. No one expected to find the infant alive after so long in the wilderness, especially with the wolf pack known to be in the area. The baby cried again, and Sierra turned from Ethan to nose gently at the log opening, momentarily forgetting the human threat in her concern for the infant. This movement gave Ethan a clear view into the hollow, confirming the impossible. A baby, alive and seemingly unharmed, wrapped in what remained of a blue blanket. "It can't be," Ethan whispered. But even in the fading light, he could see the red cap and distinctive blue blanket with rocket ships that had been described in the missing person alert. Somehow, against all odds, Jacob Morgan had survived 3 days in the forest, and more incredibly, this injured mother bear had been protecting him. Sierra's legs finally buckled. She collapsed heavily to the ground, her body no longer able to sustain her protective stance. Blood pooled beneath her, and her breathing grew more ragged. The exertion of the final stand had depleted her last reserves. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on the log where the baby lay. Ethan saw his chance. Moving slowly, hands visible, he approached the fallen bear. Sierra's eyes tracked him, but she could no longer rise to defend her charge. A deep whine escaped her throat, not aggressive but pleading. Ethan had worked with wildlife long enough to recognize the sound of a mother begging for her young safety. "I'm going to help," he murmured, inching closer. "Both of you." He reached the log and peered inside. The baby, Jacob, blinked up at him with curious eyes, remarkably calm despite his ordeal. No signs of hypothermia, no obvious injuries. It was nothing short of miraculous. Ethan carefully reached in and lifted the child, cradling him against his chest. The baby immediately began to fuss, small hands reaching not toward Ethan but toward Sierra. "Unbelievable," Ethan breathed. He knelt beside the wounded bear, close enough that the infant could see her. Jacob's cries settled as his eyes found Sierra. The bear made a soft huffing sound, her gaze fixed on the baby with what could only be described as concern. Ethan's trained eyes assessed Sierra's wounds, deep lacerations on her flanks and shoulders, a particularly nasty bite on her hind leg, and countless smaller injuries. She had lost a dangerous amount of blood. Without immediate help, she wouldn't survive the night, and neither would her unborn cubs. He had a difficult choice to make. Protocol dictated he get the baby to safety immediately. Radio for backup. Let nature take its course with the bear. But everything about this situation defied protocol. This bear had saved a human child at great personal risk. The debt could not go unpaid. "I'm going to get help," Ethan told the bear, feeling ridiculous for talking to her but unable to stop himself. "I need you to hang on." Sierra's eyes were growing distant, her breathing shallower. The baby began to cry again, as if sensing the bear's fading strength. Ethan made his decision. Still holding Jacob securely with one arm, he pulled his emergency medical kit from his backpack. He'd been trained to treat injured wildlife in emergencies, though never in circumstances quite like these. Working quickly but carefully, Ethan applied pressure bandages to Sierra's worst wounds. The bear didn't resist. She seemed to understand his intent, or perhaps was simply too weak to fight. The radio at his belt crackled to life, making both Ethan and the baby jump. "Blackwood, report. Did you locate the wolf pack?" The voice of his supervisor cut through the gathering darkness. Ethan grabbed the radio. "This is Blackwood. I found something else. I need an emergency transport team at my GPS location immediately. Medical supplies for a severely injured adult female bear, approximately 400 pounds, late-term pregnancy," and he hesitated, knowing how insane his next words would sound. "I've found the Morgan baby. Alive, the bear was protecting him." The silence that followed was profound. Then, "Say again, Blackwood? Did you say the missing infant is alive?" "Affirmative. And if we don't save this bear, we'll never be able to explain how. Trust me on this. I need that transport team now." More silence then. Team dispatched. ETA 20 minutes. "Blackwood, are you sure about this?" Ethan looked at Sierra, whose eyes had drifted closed, then at baby Jacob, who had quieted against his chest but whose gaze remained fixed on the bear. "Absolutely sure. This is like nothing I've ever seen. Just hurry." He set the radio down and returned his attention to Sierra's wounds. "Stay with me, girl," he murmured, applying more bandages. "People need to hear this story. Your cubs need you. This little guy needs you." As if understanding his words, Sierra's eyes fluttered open. She made a soft sound, almost a purr, as her gaze found the baby once more. Ethan had worked with wildlife for 15 years and had never ascribed human emotions to the animals he encountered. It was the first rule of his profession: don't anthropomorphize. But in that moment, watching the connection between this bear and this human child, he couldn't deny what he was seeing. Something extraordinary had happened here, something that defied natural law and scientific explanation. Sierra had made a choice that went against every instinct she should possess, and that choice had saved a life that by all rights should have ended days ago in the jaws of predators or the cold embrace of the wilderness night. The distant sound of a helicopter broke through the canopy of trees. Help was coming. Ethan placed a gentle hand on Sierra's massive head, a gesture he would never have imagined making just hours earlier. "Hang on," he whispered. "Your story isn't over yet." Dawn broke over Pine Ridge Medical Center with fingers of gold light stretching across the parking lot. Inside, Dr. Savannah Reed suppressed a yawn as she reviewed the night's most unusual case. In her 15 years of veterinary medicine, she had never been called to the hospital's loading dock to treat a wild bear, while human doctors hovered nearby, attending to a rescued infant. The events of the previous night still seemed dreamlike in their impossibility. "How is she?" Ethan Blackwood entered the makeshift veterinary treatment room. His ranger uniform rumpled from a night spent in a hospital waiting chair. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but there was an energy in his movements that belied his exhaustion. Dr. Reed gestured to the massive form of Sierra, sedated on a reinforced table that had been rushed in from the veterinary center. IV fluids dripped steadily into the bear's arm, while monitors beeped with her vital signs. "Remarkably stable, considering everything she went through," Savannah replied, checking the bandages that covered Sierra's worst wounds. "We've stopped the bleeding, administered antibiotics for infection, and given her fluids. The biggest concern now is her pregnancy. The stress could trigger premature labor, which would endanger both her and the cubs." Ethan moved closer, studying the bear with a gaze that mixed professional assessment with something deeper, respect, perhaps, or awe. "And what about the tranquilizers? Are they safe for the cubs?" "We used the minimum effective dose," Dr. Reed explained. "It was a calculated risk. Without sedation, we couldn't treat her wounds, and she certainly would have died. The cubs' best chance is for their mother to survive." Ethan nodded, then asked the question that had been weighing on him all night. "What do you make of it, Doctor? Reed? A wild bear protecting a human baby? Every scientific principle I know says it shouldn't have happened." Savannah adjusted one of Sierra's monitors before answering. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "Medicine and veterinary science teach us to believe in observable facts, measurable data. But sometimes," she paused, searching for words, "sometimes we encounter things that remind us how little we truly understand about consciousness, about connection between living beings." "The Morgan baby is doing well," Ethan said after a moment of silence. "Not even a case of hypothermia. The doctors can't explain it. 3 nights in the forest, temperatures dropping to near freezing, and not so much as a sniffle. They're calling it a miracle. And the parents. Lily Morgan hasn't stopped crying since she got here. Tears of joy, of disbelief. When I told her what happened, how we found her son, she thought I was making it up to spare her the grisly truth. Ethan's voice grew soft. But Jacob, that's the baby's name, he kept reaching for the bear when we separated them, crying for her. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. Before Dr. Reed could respond, one of the monitors attached to Sierra began to beep more rapidly. The bear's massive body shuddered, her sedated state not quite deep enough to mask the pain that suddenly gripped her. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, stepping back as Savannah rushed to Sierra's side. "Labor," Dr. Reed said grimly, checking Sierra's vitals. "The stress was too much. She's delivering early." She grabbed her radio from the nearby table. "I need my team in here now. The bear is going into labor." The next hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Savannah's team worked with practiced efficiency, monitoring Sierra's condition while helping her deliver her cubs despite her sedated state. Ethan remained pressed against the wall, out of the way but unwilling to leave. He watched as, one by one, 3 tiny bear cubs entered the world, smaller than they should be, but alive, each one a small miracle given their mother's ordeal. 3 healthy cubs, Dr. Reed announced finally, her scrubs stained with blood, but her face glowing with professional satisfaction. 2 males and a female. They're underweight due to the early delivery, but their vital signs are good. Ethan stepped forward to look at the tiny creatures nestled against their unconscious mother. They were impossibly small, eyes still closed, making soft mewling sounds as they instinctively sought warmth. "Will they make it?" "With proper care, yes," Savannah nodded. "We'll need to keep them and Sierra here until they're stronger. It's not ideal. Wild bears don't belong in captivity, but they have no chance in the wild right now." A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse from the human side of the hospital peered in, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to intrude, but Mrs. Morgan is asking if she can see the bear. She's quite insistent." Ethan and Dr. Reed exchanged glances. "It's against protocol," Ethan began. "Everything about this situation is against protocol," Savannah pointed out with a small smile. "Sierra is sedated. The cubs are being monitored. A brief visit should be safe enough." Minutes later, Lily Morgan entered the makeshift veterinary suite, clutching baby Jacob tightly to her chest. She was a slight woman with honey-blonde hair and eyes reddened from days of tears. Behind her came her husband, Michael Morgan, his protective hand on his wife's shoulder, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, joy at his son's return, disbelief at the circumstances. "Is that her?" Lily whispered, her eyes fixed on Sierra's massive form. "The bear who saved my baby?" Ethan nodded. "We don't know exactly what happened in the forest, but when I found them, she was positioning herself between your son and a wolf pack. She had multiple injuries consistent with fighting off predators, and Jacob was completely unharmed in that hollow log." Lily moved closer, her steps hesitant. Baby Jacob, who had been quietly resting against his mother's shoulder, suddenly perked up. His small body twisted, little arms reaching toward Sierra with surprising strength. He began to make excited sounds, not quite words, but clearly sounds of recognition. "He knows her," Michael said, his voice filled with wonder. "Look at him. He actually recognizes the bear." Lily's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she carefully approached Sierra, still holding Jacob. "I don't understand how this happened," she said shakily, "but I know that I owe this animal my son's life." The baby continued to reach for Sierra, making increasingly frustrated noises when he couldn't touch her. After a moment's hesitation, Lily moved close enough that Jacob could place his tiny hand on Sierra's fur. The contact seemed to calm him immediately. He cooed softly, patting the bear's side with a gentleness that seemed impossible in one so young. The maternal instinct crosses species boundaries sometimes, Dr. Reed said quietly, watching the scene with professional interest. There are documented cases of animals adopting orphans of different species, but usually it's between creatures with some similarities. A cat adopting rabbits, a dog caring for tiger cubs, never something as evolutionarily distant as a bear and a human infant. When we were searching, Michael began, his voice thick with emotion, everyone told us to prepare for the worst. That no baby could survive in the wilderness with a wolf pack hunting in the area. They said our best hope was to find his body for closure. He swallowed hard. But now, it's like something out of a fairy tale. A soft sound from the table drew everyone's attention. Sierra was stirring slightly, the sedatives beginning to wear off. Dr. Reed moved quickly to check her vitals. "We should go," she advised the Morgans. "She'll be confused when she wakes, and a wild bear, even one who showed this extraordinary behavior, is still dangerous, especially with newborn cubs to protect." Lily nodded reluctantly, but as she tried to pull Jacob away, the baby began to wail, his little hands gripping Sierra's fur with surprising strength. The sound seemed to penetrate Sierra's sedated state. The bear's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as she took in her surroundings. Her body tensed, instinctive fear of the unfamiliar environment and the humans surrounding her. "Everyone back up," Ethan warned, moving slowly toward the door. "Doctor Reed, do you have another sedative ready?" But before Savannah could respond, something remarkable happened. Baby Jacob's cries seemed to cut through Sierra's confusion. The bear's gaze found the infant, and her body visibly relaxed. Instead of the aggression or fear they expected, Sierra made a soft huffing sound, the same gentle noise Ethan had heard her make in the forest when interacting with the baby. Jacob's cries immediately stopped. He babbled happily, still reaching for Sierra. The bear's massive head lifted slightly, her dark eyes fixed on the infant with what could only be described as recognition. "It's not possible," Michael whispered, but the evidence was before them. Somehow, in the span of 3 desperate days in the wilderness, a bond had formed between predator and what should have been prey, a bond that transcended natural law and scientific explanation. Dr. Reed moved cautiously to check on the newborn cubs, keeping a wary eye on Sierra. But the mother bear seemed more interested in the human baby than in her own immediate surroundings. She made no aggressive moves, even as the veterinarian examined her cubs. "I've never seen anything like this," Savannah admitted, her professional detachment momentarily shaken. "She should be highly defensive with newborn cubs, especially around humans. Instead, she seems accepting of our presence. Because of Jacob," Lily said softly. "She recognizes him." As if to confirm her words, Sierra made another gentle huffing sound, her eyes never leaving the baby. Jacob responded with delighted babbling, his small hand patting the air in the bear's direction. "I think we need to give everyone some space," Dr. Reed said finally, her clinical training reasserting itself despite her amazement. "Sierra needs rest to recover from her injuries and the birth. And I'm sure your family could use some quiet time together as well," she added, smiling at the Morgans. Lily nodded reluctantly, adjusting her hold on Jacob, who immediately began to fuss as he was carried away from Sierra. The bear's eyes followed them until the door closed. Then she turned her attention to her cubs, nudging them gently with her nose despite her obvious exhaustion. "What happens now?" Ethan asked when the Morgans had left. He watched as Dr. Reed checked Sierra's vital signs once more. "We monitor her and the cubs closely," Savannah replied. "Once they're stable enough, we'll need to release them back into the wild. It's where they belong." "And the connection with the baby?" Ethan pressed. "I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Reed's expression grew thoughtful. "Nature is full of mysteries, Ranger Blackwood. Sometimes the best we can do is observe and learn." She glanced at her watch. "You should get some rest. You've been here all night." Ethan hesitated, looking back at Sierra. "I'll be back to check on her this afternoon." "I'm sure you will," Savannah said with a knowing smile. News of the miraculous rescue spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. By noon, television crews from 3 different networks had set up in the hospital parking lot. Social media buzzed with speculation and half-truths. The hospital administration, unprepared for the media frenzy, hastily called a press conference to address the situation and protect the privacy of both the Morgan family and the medical staff. Hospital director Dr. Connor Adams stood at the podium, his normally unflappable demeanor showing signs of strain. At approximately 8:15 p.m. last night, 4-month-old Jacob Morgan was brought to this facility after being found in Blackwater National Forest. He had been missing for 3 days. I'm happy to report that Jacob is in excellent health and has been reunited with his family. The crowd of reporters erupted with questions. Dr. Adams raised his hands for silence. "I understand there's significant public interest in the circumstances of Jacob's rescue. However, out of respect for the Morgan family's privacy, we will not be disclosing all details at this time." "Is it true that a bear protected the baby from wolves?" called out a reporter from the front row. "Sources say the infant was found with an injured mother bear who had fought off predators to keep him safe." Dr. Adams frowned, clearly unhappy with the leak. "I can confirm that Jacob was found in proximity to a wounded female bear, which is currently receiving veterinary care at our facility. Forest Ranger Ethan Blackwood, who discovered them, believes the bear may have played a role in Jacob's survival. Beyond that, I won't speculate." "Has anything like this ever been documented before?" shouted another reporter. "Not to my knowledge, Doctor," Adams admitted, "and I would caution against anthropomorphizing wild animals or drawing conclusions before all the facts are known." "Is the bear going to be put down?" came a question from the back of the room. Dr. Adams' expression hardened. "Absolutely not. The bear has committed no aggressive act toward humans. In fact, if the initial assessment is correct, quite the opposite. She is receiving medical treatment for her injuries and will be released back into the wild when she and her newborn cubs are strong enough." This revelation caused another stir among the reporters. Dr. Adams quickly wrapped up the press conference, promising updates when appropriate, but emphasizing that medical care, both human and veterinary, remained the hospital's priority. As the crowd dispersed, a tall woman in a crisp suit remained behind, studying a tablet computer with intense concentration. Jessica Brooks, field investigator for the National Wildlife Research Institute, had been dispatched to Pine Ridge the moment reports of the unusual bear behavior reached headquarters. 20 years of studying animal cognition and interspecies interaction had taught her to be skeptical of sensational stories, but also to recognize when something truly unprecedented might be occurring. Jessica approached the podium where Dr. Adams was gathering his notes. Dr. Adams, Jessica Brooks, NWRI. She offered her credentials. "I'd like to speak with Ranger Blackwood and observe the bear, if possible." Dr. Adams sighed, recognizing the Federal Wildlife Agency's authority. "You'll need to speak with Dr. Reed, our consulting veterinarian. She's overseeing the bear's care." He hesitated. Miss Brooks, I should warn you. What's happening here defies conventional explanation. I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like the connection between this bear and the Morgan baby." Jessica smiled diplomatically. "That's why I'm here, Doctor, to observe and document the unexplained." In a private room on the pediatric floor, Lily Morgan sat in a rocking chair by the window, holding Jacob close as she had been doing since his miraculous return. Her husband, Michael, paced the small room, his phone pressed to his ear as he updated yet another family member on their extraordinary good fortune. "Yes, Mom, he's perfectly fine," Michael was saying. "Not a scratch on him. The doctors can't believe it either. No, we haven't spoken to any reporters yet. The hospital's keeping them away. I know it sounds crazy. We're still trying to process it ourselves." Lily barely listened to the conversation, her attention fixed on her son. Jacob's eyes were heavy with sleep, his tiny body relaxed against her chest. She stroked his soft hair, marveling at his perfect, unharmed state. The horror of the past 3 days, the frantic searching, the dwindling hope, the sympathetic but increasingly grim expressions of the rescue teams, seemed like a nightmare from which she had finally awakened. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Michael quickly ended his call as a nurse entered with Dr. Haley Dawson, the pediatrician who had examined Jacob upon his arrival. "How's our miracle baby doing?" Dr. Dawson asked cheerfully, approaching to check Jacob's vital signs. "Sleeping peacefully," Lily replied. "He's been through so much." Dr. Dawson nodded as she gently examined the drowsy infant. "His vitals are perfect. Temperature normal, no signs of dehydration. Honestly, if I didn't know better, I'd think he'd spent the last 3 days in a nursery, not the wilderness." "How is it possible?" Michael asked, the question that had been haunting them both. 3 nights in the forest, temperatures in the low 40s. He should have at least been hypothermic. Dr. Dawson's expression grew thoughtful. The log where Ranger Blackwood found him would have provided some shelter from the elements, and bears have a higher body temperature than humans, around 101 degrees. She hesitated. If the bear was indeed keeping him warm, staying close to him through those nights. "You believe it, then?" Lily asked hopefully. "That the bear was protecting him? The nurses have been whispering about it, but it sounds so impossible." "As a scientist, I'm trained to be skeptical," Dr. Dawson admitted. "But as Jacob's doctor, I have to acknowledge that something extraordinary kept him alive and well. The evidence suggests it was indeed the bear." She smiled gently. "Medicine can explain the how of his survival. Body heat, shelter from predators, but not the why. Why would a wild bear protect a human child? That part remains a mystery." Michael ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We want to see her again, the bear. Jacob seems connected to her somehow. He gets agitated when we talk about her like he understands." Dr. Dawson looked surprised. "That would be highly unusual for an infant his age. Their cognitive—" As if on cue, Jacob suddenly stirred, his eyes flying open at the mention of Sierra. He began to twist in Lily's arms, making the same urgent sounds they had heard when he had first seen the bear in the veterinary suite. "See what I mean?" Michael said. "It's like he knows we're talking about her." Dr. Dawson observed Jacob with professional interest. "Fascinating. Infants can form attachments rapidly in certain circumstances, but usually only to human caregivers or familiar objects." She thought for a moment. "I'll speak with Dr. Reed. Perhaps a more controlled interaction might be beneficial, for Jacob's emotional well-being and for scientific documentation." Lily held Jacob closer, trying to soothe his increasing agitation. "Thank you, Doctor. We just want to understand what happened out there in the forest, what our son experienced." After Dr. Dawson left, Michael sat heavily in the chair beside his wife. "Do you think he'll ever forget her? The bear?" Lily stroked Jacob's cheek as he finally began to settle. "I don't know. Part of me hopes he does. What 4-year-old needs to remember being lost in the wilderness? But another part—" She took a deep breath. "Another part hopes he remembers that something miraculous happened to him. That when all hope seemed lost, he was saved by the most unlikely guardian imaginable." Michael reached over to take his son's tiny hand. "When he's older, we'll tell him the story. Even if he doesn't remember, the world won't forget. The baby and the bear. It's the kind of story that becomes legend." In the makeshift veterinary suite, Dr. Reed and her team worked tirelessly, monitoring Sierra and her cubs while fielding a constant stream of calls from wildlife experts, media outlets, and curious colleagues. Sierra had stabilized after the birth, her remarkable constitution allowing her to begin healing despite her significant injuries and the stress of premature labor. The cubs, though smaller than ideal, were surprisingly robust. They nursed eagerly when placed at their mother's side, their tiny forms nestled securely against her warm fur. Dr. Reed had set up infrared cameras to observe them without disturbing the new family, allowing Sierra the privacy and quiet she needed while still gathering valuable data on her unusual behavior. Jessica Brooks arrived mid-afternoon, armed with recording equipment and a skeptic's determination to find a rational explanation for the reported events. She found Ethan Blackwood already there, watching the Bear family through the observation window. Ranger Blackwood? Jessica approached, offering her hand. "Jessica Brooks, National Wildlife Research Institute. I was hoping to speak with you about what you witnessed in the forest last night." Ethan shook her hand, his expression wary. "I've already filed a report with the Forest Service and given a statement to local authorities. I'm not here to question your account," Jessica assured him. "I'm here to understand it better. The NWRI studies animal cognition and behavior. What you've described, a wild bear protecting a human infant, represents a significant anomaly in documented predator behavior." Ethan's gaze returned to Sierra, who was gently nosing one of her cubs into a better nursing position. "Call it what you want. Anomaly, miracle, maternal instinct gone haywire. I know what I saw. That bear fought off a wolf pack to protect a human baby, at great risk to herself and her unborn cubs. If you're looking for a scientific explanation, I don't have one." Jessica studied him thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most valuable scientific discoveries begin with observations that don't fit existing theories." She moved closer to the window. "May I see your field notes? Any photos or recordings you might have taken at the scene?" Before Ethan could respond, the door to the observation area opened, and Dr. Reed entered with Dr. Dawson and the Morgan family. Jacob, who had been quietly resting in his mother's arms, suddenly perked up, his small body twisting with unexpected strength as they approached the window. He sensed her before he even saw her, Lily explained to the startled researchers. "Dr. Dawson thought it might help us understand what happened if we observed them together." Jessica watched with intense interest as baby Jacob became increasingly animated, small hands reaching toward the glass that separated him from Sierra. On the other side, something equally remarkable was happening. The mother bear, who had been peacefully resting with her cubs, suddenly raised her head, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent. Her gaze moved unerringly to the window where Jacob was. "Incredible," Jessica murmured, pulling out her tablet to record the interaction. "It's mutual recognition across species." Sierra made the distinctive huffing sound that Ethan had now heard several times. Not a growl or a threat, but a gentle vocalization he had never heard a bear make in any other context. Jacob responded with delighted babbling, bouncing in Lily's arms. "They're communicating," Dr. Dawson observed, her scientific detachment temporarily forgotten in the face of such an extraordinary scene. Or at least, they're responding to each other in a consistent, recognizable pattern. Michael stepped closer to the glass. "Can she see us through that window? Or is it one way?" "She can see you," Dr. Reed confirmed. "The window allows us to observe without entering the room unnecessarily, but it's transparent from both sides." As if to prove her point, Sierra moved closer to the window, her movements slow and deliberate due to her injuries. She sat up with obvious effort, her dark eyes fixed not just on Jacob but on his parents as well. There was an intelligence in that gaze that sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. Not the cunning of a predator, but something deeper, more cognizant. "She recognizes us from this morning," Lily whispered. "She knows we're Jacob's parents." Jessica began taking rapid notes on her tablet. Bears have excellent memory and sensory capabilities. If she associated your sense with the infant she protected, it's possible she could form that connection. "It's more than that," Ethan said quietly. "Look at her posture, her eye contact. I've encountered dozens of bears in the wild. They don't behave like this. Not even the most habituated park bears that are used to humans." Sierra remained at the window, watching as Jacob continued his excited movements and vocalizations. After several minutes, she made a soft chuffing sound and slowly returned to her cubs, who had begun to squirm in her absence. She settled beside them but kept her gaze directed toward the window, toward Jacob. "I've never seen anything like it," Jessica admitted, her scientific skepticism giving way to genuine wonder. "This challenges everything we understand about interspecies relationships, especially between predators and potential prey." "Science can't explain everything," Lily said softly, bouncing Jacob gently as he began to fuss at Sierra's retreat. "Sometimes we just have to accept the miracle for what it is." Dr. Reed checked her watch. "We should let Sierra rest. She's still recovering from significant trauma, and those cubs need her full attention." She looked at the Morgans sympathetically. "You're welcome to return tomorrow. I think these visits might actually be beneficial for her recovery. She seems calmer when Jacob is near." As they prepared to leave, Jessica approached the Morgans. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, I know this is an overwhelming time for your family, but I'd like to request permission to observe and document these interactions as part of our research. What's happening here could significantly advance our understanding of animal cognition and cross-species bonding." Michael looked uncertain, but Lily nodded slowly. "As long as it doesn't interfere with Sierra's recovery or upset Jacob. This bear saved our son's life. We owe her everything." The story of Jacob Morgan and the mother bear spread far beyond the small town of Pine Ridge. By evening, international news outlets had picked up the tale, dubbing it the miracle in the woods. Wildlife experts debated the plausibility of the account, with skeptics suggesting more mundane explanations. Perhaps the bear had simply been too injured to harm the baby, or had viewed the log as part of her territory rather than specifically protecting its occupant. But those who had witnessed the interaction between Sierra and Jacob found such explanations hollow. Something profound had occurred in those 3 days in the wilderness, something that transcended ordinary animal behavior and challenged conventional understanding of the boundaries between species. In his small apartment near the hospital, Ethan Blackwood sat at his desk, carefully writing his official report for the Forest Service. He had spent hours trying to capture in clinical, professional language what he had witnessed. Words like maternal behavior, anomalous protection instinct, and interspecies bonding seemed woefully inadequate to describe the connection he had observed. His phone rang, interrupting his struggle for appropriate terminology. He answered to find his supervisor, Regional Director Logan Carter, on the line. "Blackwood, what the hell is going on out there?" Logan's voice held a mixture of concern and disbelief. "I'm getting calls from the director's office, from wildlife advocacy groups, from media outlets I've never even heard of. They're saying you found a bear babysitting a human infant." Ethan sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "It's more complicated than that, sir. I've been working on my report all evening. The bear, Sierra, as Dr. Reed named her, appeared to be actively defending the Morgan baby from predators. She sustained multiple injuries consistent with fighting off wolves." "Bears don't protect human children, Blackwood," Logan said flatly. "They eat them. Are you sure you didn't interrupt a predator with its prey?" "Sir, with all due respect, I know what I saw." Ethan's voice hardened. The bear was positioned between the baby and the approaching threats. The infant was completely unharmed after 3 days in the wilderness. And there's a continued connection between them. I've observed it myself at the medical center. This isn't a case of misinterpreted predator behavior. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Logan spoke again, his tone less confrontational. "You realize what this means, don't you? If what you're describing is accurate, it challenges fundamental assumptions about predator-prey relationships, about animal cognition, about interspecies interaction. The scientific community is going to tear this apart." "I know, sir." Ethan glanced at the half-finished report on his desk. "That's why I'm being so careful with my documentation. But I won't deny what I witnessed to make it fit existing theories." "No, I wouldn't expect you to." Logan sighed heavily. "The service is sending a team to assist with documentation and eventual release planning. They'll arrive tomorrow. And Blackwood, prepare yourself. This is going to be the biggest wildlife story since they cloned that sheep." After ending the call, Ethan returned to his report, but his mind kept wandering back to the moment he had found Sierra and Jacob in the forest. The image of the wounded bear standing guard over a human infant defied every natural law he had been taught. Yet there had been nothing unnatural about it in that moment. It had seemed, somehow, like the most natural thing in the world. Days passed, turning into weeks. Sierra's recovery progressed remarkably well under Dr. Reed's care. Her wounds healed cleanly, her strength returned, and her cubs grew stronger each day. The makeshift veterinary suite had been transformed into a more appropriate rehabilitation enclosure, with a small artificial den and enough space for Sierra to move comfortably as she regained her health. The Morgan family visited daily, sometimes twice daily. Jacob, who had shown no ill effects from his wilderness ordeal, continued to demonstrate an uncanny connection with Sierra. When brought to the observation area, he would immediately become animated, reaching toward the bear with unmistakable recognition and delight. Sierra, in turn, would approach the window, her dark eyes watchful and intelligent as she observed the growing infant. Scientists from various disciplines descended on Pine Ridge, drawn by the unprecedented nature of the case. Ethologists studied Sierra's behavior, comparing it to documented cases of cross-species adoption. Neurologists speculated about the brain chemistry that might explain such an extreme deviation from typical predator instincts. Conservation experts evaluated the implications for human-wildlife conflict management. Jessica Brooks coordinated the research efforts, collecting data, conducting interviews, and documenting every interaction between Sierra and Jacob. Her initial skepticism had given way to methodical fascination as she witnessed the ongoing connection between the bear and the human infant. The most extraordinary aspect isn't just that she protected him initially, Jessica explained to Ethan one afternoon as they observed Sierra grooming her cubs. It's that the bond persists. Most documented cases of interspecies care involve temporary interventions, a moment of protection, a brief period of nurturing. But this relationship shows no signs of diminishing, even as both parties return to their natural environments and social groups. Will it complicate her release? Ethan asked, the question that had been weighing on him. If she's formed this attachment to humans, to Jacob specifically, can she safely return to the wild? Jessica's expression grew serious. That's the question we're all grappling with. Bears with positive human associations can become problematic, approaching campgrounds, losing their natural wariness. But Sierra shows no interest in other humans. Only Jacob, and by extension, his family seemed to elicit this response. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Morgans for their afternoon visit. Jacob, now 5 months old and noticeably bigger than when he'd been rescued, squirmed eagerly in Lily's arms as they approached the observation window. As always, Sierra seemed to sense his presence before she saw him, her head lifting and turning toward the window even before they entered his line of sight. "It's still amazing to watch," Michael observed, standing beside Ethan. "The doctors say Jacob is developing typically in every way, except for this. His reaction to Sierra is beyond anything they'd expect from an infant his age." Lily brought Jacob closer to the window. The baby immediately placed his small hands against the glass, his face alight with recognition and joy. Sierra approached from the other side, her movements now fluid and strong as her healing had progressed. She made the familiar huffing sound that seemed reserved only for Jacob. "Doctor, Reed says Sierra is nearly ready for release," Ethan told the Morgans. "Her wounds have healed, and the cubs are thriving. They're discussing potential locations for reintroduction, somewhere with good food sources but minimal human contact." Lily's expression faltered. "So soon? But Jacob..." She trailed off, unable to articulate the complex emotions the situation evoked. How could she explain the significance of a relationship that defied scientific explanation? How could she accept that her son would be separated from the creature that had saved his life through an act of inexplicable compassion? "We always knew this day would come," Michael said gently, placing a supportive hand on his wife's shoulder. "Sierra belongs in the wild. That's what's best for her and her cubs." "I know," Lily's voice wavered. "It's just, will Jacob remember her? Will he somehow know what she did for him? Or will all of this fade like any infant memory, leaving only the story we tell him when he's older?" Jessica, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Mrs. Morgan, the bond your son formed with Sierra during those critical days in the forest may indeed fade from his conscious memory as he grows. But research suggests that early experiences, even those before the formation of explicit memories, can leave lasting imprints on development, on how a child relates to the world, on their sense of security and trust." "What Jessica means," Ethan translated with a small smile, "is that even if Jacob doesn't remember Sierra specifically, the miracle of what happened between them will shape who he becomes. That's a kind of remembering, too." Lily nodded, blinking back tears as she watched her son continuing his silent communion with the bear. Jacob was babbling now, his small voice carrying a cadence almost like conversation. Sierra listened, her head tilted slightly, her eyes never leaving the baby's face. "When will she be released?" Michael asked. 2 days from now," Ethan replied. "We've selected a remote area of the national forest, about 30 miles from where she was found. Good berry patches, ample water, minimal human traffic. The cubs will have the best possible start. We'd like to be there, Lily said suddenly, surprising everyone. For the release, I know it's not standard procedure, but we need to say goodbye. Jacob needs to say goodbye. Ethan exchanged glances with Jessica, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'll speak with Dr. Reed and the Forest Service team, he promised. I think an exception can be made, given the circumstances. The morning of Sierra's release dawned clear and cool, the forest vibrant with early summer growth. A small convoy of vehicles wound along the rarely used fire road, carrying the carefully orchestrated release team to the designated site. Dr. Reed supervised the transport of Sierra and her cubs, sedated just enough to keep them calm during the journey, but alert enough to orient quickly once released. The Morgans followed in Ethan's Forest Service truck, Jacob securely fastened in his car seat between them. The baby seemed to sense the significance of the day. He was unusually quiet, his wide eyes taking in the passing forest with solemn attention. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan had asked when he picked them up at dawn. "Release operations can be unpredictable." "We're sure," Michael had answered firmly. "We need to see this through to the end." Now, as they reached the clearing that would serve as the release point, Ethan reviewed the safety protocols one final time. Stay in the vehicle until the transport cage is positioned. Once Sierra is released, we'll maintain absolute silence. No sudden movements, no approaching the bears under any circumstances. He looked pointedly at Jacob. "Keep him close and quiet. If he becomes upset, you'll need to return to the vehicle immediately." The Morgan family nodded their understanding. Jacob cradled securely in Lily's arms. They watched as the team efficiently unloaded the large transport cage from the specialized truck. Sierra was visible inside, now fully awake and alert, her cubs nestled against her. Her dark eyes surveyed the forest around her, nostrils flaring as she took in the sense of her natural habitat. Dr. Reed approached the Morgans, her expression both professional and compassionate. "We've fitted Sierra with a tracking collar so we can monitor her movements and ensure she's adapting well to her return to the wild. The cubs are old enough now to follow her and learn survival skills, though still dependent on her for protection and guidance." "Will she be safe?" Lily asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "From wolves, from hunters? We've chosen this area carefully," Dr. Reed assured her. "It's within a protected zone where hunting is prohibited, and Sierra has proven herself more than capable of defending her cubs from natural predators." She smiled gently. "She's a remarkable bear, Mrs. Morgan. Strong, intelligent, adaptive. If any bear can thrive after what she's been through, it's Sierra." A soft call from the release team signaled that everything was in position. Dr. Reed moved away to supervise the final preparations, leaving the Morgan family with Ethan at a safe distance from the transport cage. "This is it," Ethan said quietly. "Once the cage door opens, we maintain complete silence until she's moved well into the forest." Jacob, who had been unusually subdued, suddenly became alert as the transport cage was positioned facing the deep woods. He twisted in Lily's arms, his small face alight with recognition. Somehow, despite the distance, despite the change in context, he knew Sierra was there. The team retreated to their vehicles, leaving only Dr. Reed by the electronic release mechanism. She gave a final survey of the area, ensuring everyone was in safe positions, then pressed the button that would open the cage door. There was a mechanical click, then the front panel of the transport cage slowly lifted. Sunlight flooded the interior, illuminating Sierra and her cubs. For a long moment, nothing happened. Sierra remained inside, watchful, cautious, her protective instincts evident in how she positioned herself slightly in front of her cubs. Then, with deliberate movement, she stepped forward, emerging from the cage into the dappled sunlight of the forest clearing. Her coat gleamed richly in the natural light, her powerful form no longer weakened by injury but restored to its natural majesty. She paused, scenting the air, her gaze sweeping the surroundings in careful assessment. Her eyes found the Morgan family almost immediately. Though they stood at a considerable distance, Sierra's keen senses had no difficulty identifying them, or, more specifically, identifying Jacob. The bear remained completely still, watching them with that same intelligent awareness that had so impressed the researchers during her rehabilitation. Jacob, for his part, exhibited none of the restraint of the adults. He bounced excitedly in Lily's arms, making small sounds of recognition and reaching out towards Sierra. Lily held him firmly, tears streaming silently down her face as she watched the creature that had saved her son prepare to return to the wild. Sierra's cubs emerged cautiously from the transport cage, staying close to their mother's massive form. They were much larger now than when they'd been born, their movements more coordinated, their curiosity evident as they sniffed at the forest floor and the unfamiliar scents surrounding them. Everyone expected Sierra to turn away then, to lead her cubs into the protective cover of the forest. It was the natural behavior, the predicted outcome based on countless wildlife releases. But Sierra, as she had from the beginning, defied expectations. Instead of immediately retreating into the woods, she began to move in a wide arc around the clearing, not toward the humans, but not directly away from them either. She was giving her cubs a chance to explore their new surroundings while maintaining a safe distance from the observers. Her behavior showed remarkable awareness of the situation, and perhaps, Ethan thought with wonder, a desire to prolong these final moments of connection before the inevitable separation. Finally, Sierra paused at the edge of the dense forest. She turned, facing the assembled humans one last time. Her gaze locked with Jacob's across the clearing, an impossible connection bridging the evolutionary gulf between their species. The bear made her distinctive huffing sound, soft but unmistakable in the hushed clearing. Jacob, as if understanding perfectly, raised one small hand in a gesture that seemed eerily like a wave goodbye. No one had taught him this. He was too young for such symbolic communication. Yet there it was, a farewell between two beings whose brief intersection had defied natural law and scientific explanation. Sierra held her position for another long moment, as if committing the image to memory. Then, with a final soft huff, she turned and led her cubs into the shadows of the forest. The small family disappeared among the trees, visible for a few moments more as moving shapes in the underbrush, and then gone completely, swallowed by the wilderness that was their rightful home. No one spoke for several minutes after Sierra's departure. The researchers remained at their stations, recording and documenting. The Morgan family stood silently, Lily and Michael holding each other and Jacob between them, watching the empty forest edge where Sierra had vanished. It was Jacob who broke the silence at last, not with tears as might have been expected, but with a string of happy, babbling sounds, the same sounds he had always made in Sierra's presence, as if, somehow, he understood that this parting was not a tragedy, but a completion, a return to the natural order of things. "He knows," Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Somehow, he understands." Ethan nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment he had just witnessed. In his years of working with wildlife, he had seen countless wonders of the natural world, but nothing that had touched him as deeply as the connection between this bear and this child, a connection that had no scientific explanation but whose reality was undeniable to anyone who had witnessed it. Dr. Reed approached, her professional demeanor softened by the emotion of the moment. "We'll continue monitoring Sierra through the tracking collar," she assured them. "All the data indicates she'll readapt well to the wild." "And Jacob?" Michael asked quietly. "What about his connection to her?" Dr. Reed smiled gently. "The human brain is remarkably plastic, especially in infancy. He'll adjust. The explicit memory of Sierra will likely fade as he grows." She paused, her scientific certainty giving way to something more personal. "But what happened between them, that miracle in the woods, that's now part of who he is, who you all are. Some things transcend ordinary explanation, Mr. Morgan. Some connections leave marks that never truly disappear, even if we can't see them or measure them with our instruments." As they walked back to the vehicles, Jacob riding contently in his father's arms, Ethan found himself hanging back slightly, his gaze drawn repeatedly to the forest edge where Sierra had disappeared. Jessica Brooks fell into step beside him, her tablet tucked under her arm, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said quietly, "in all my years of studying animal behavior, I've documented countless examples of what we might call anomalies, behaviors that don't fit neatly into existing theories. But nearly always, with enough observation, with enough data, we find an explanation that aligns with evolutionary principles or adaptive strategies." "And this time?" Ethan asked. Jessica looked toward the Morgans, several paces ahead of them, then back at the silent forest. "This time, I think we've encountered something that exists at the very edge of our understanding, perhaps beyond it. Something that reminds us that, for all our science, for all our theories and classifications, the natural world still holds mysteries we may never fully comprehend." Ethan nodded, a small smile touching his lips as he watched Jacob waving his small hand toward the forest one final time. "Maybe that's for the best," he said softly. "Maybe some miracles aren't meant to be explained, just witnessed and remembered." As the convoy of vehicles prepared to depart, leaving Sierra and her cubs to begin their new life in the wild, a lone wolf howl echoed from a distant ridge. The sound floated through the clear morning air, a haunting reminder of the night when a desperate mother bear had defied her own nature to protect a creature she should have ignored or feared, and in doing so, had revealed a capacity for compassion that transcended species boundaries.